Hello and welcome back to 1921 Copenhagen, where we are invisible, an invisible entourage to Grand Duke Dmitri Pavlovich of Russia as he makes his first journey to Copenhagen and experiences the city and the people there for the first time. So yesterday he gave us a good solid description of what the city is like as he sees it and the impressions it made on him. And today we're going to start finding out a little bit about the people he encounters there. I could have gone further today, but I decided to just do a short one, and there will be a lot of interesting people to talk about as he continues to meet people and assess things. Actually, as he was writing this, he had already been in Copenhagen for 2 weeks. So, but he had a lot to say, and he's going about it in a fairly systematic way. And just to recap briefly, he was a guest there of Sir Charles and Lady Lucia Marling, who were the British minister to Denmark, to Copenhagen, and his wife, and Dmitri had lived with them for over a year in Tehran when Sir Charles had been the British minister there to the British legation, and Dmitri had lived at the British legation, and they had formed very deep bond, familial bond, but things were complicated with Lady Lucia, so we'll get into that later. But Dmitri informs us that he went to Copenhagen not to see the Dowager Empress, Maria Fyodorovna, the widow of Tsar Alexander III. She was there, and he tells us that he went specifically to see the Marlings, and not her daughter Olga, but we'll find out more about that, because certainly he's going to spend time with them while he's there. Okay, so let's dive in. One doesn't notice at all that one is in a neutral country, because all the Danes, an overwhelming majority, are pro-Entente and strongly Germanophobic, so that even at the ball given by the Danish Minister of Foreign Affairs, Scavenius, he's the former ambassador to Petrograd, there were representatives of all the countries except Germany and Austria. The treatment of Russians is undeniably good. One can see that by the fact that our envoy, or rather our chargé d'affaires, Baron Maindorf, occupies a real position and is treated correctly and normally. I had heard a lot of bad things about him. Apparently, many of the members of society don't like him, but he's not stupid, and of course he does a lot to preserve his position as a representative of Russia. They say that he welcomed the revolution and very quickly tore down all the eagles and crowns, but with me he is very decent and, on the contrary, very attentive and courteous. They also say that he's unpleasant to Empress Maria Fyodorovna and that he responds rudely to her, but I haven't noticed that. Okay, I decided to stop there just because after Baron Maindorf, he goes on to talk about another person whom he has met. So that seemed like a good time to stop for today. So I know next to nothing about Denmark. I don't know that I've ever gotten to know someone from Denmark. I have met people from Sweden, and I have one very close friend who's Swedish, so I've learned a lot over the years from him about Sweden, and he's even taken pains to teach me a few words in Swedish of a very practical type. So yeah, that's great, but I don't know anything about Denmark, so I'll admit I was a little surprised when Dmitri said that they were so anti-German in Denmark and so strongly pro-Entente. There was no reason for me not to think that, but I guess, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what I guess. I guess I thought, they're pretty close, Germany and Denmark, and so I thought maybe there was strong ties, but I guess at least after the First World War and certainly during the Second World War, yeah, well, I know that they'd had some differences over whether a part of Germany was Danish or not. So maybe I shouldn't have been surprised. I'm sort of talking myself into a hole here. But whether Dmitri was surprised or not, he finds it noteworthy that I'm sure he wasn't doing a survey, but according to him, an overwhelming majority of the Danes that he met were pro-Entente and anti-German, and maybe he was doing a survey after a fashion, because we know that he wants for his information bureau to have information not only about what's going on inside the Soviet Union, but also how other countries are relating to Russia specifically. So he was probably asking people when it seemed appropriate. So he is invited to a ball, or maybe, in fact, maybe the ball was given, what to do about this? Maybe the ball was given for him by the, that's not going to work. Okay, by the, even worse, maybe this, by the Danish Minister of Foreign Affairs, and this was Harald Scavenius. He was in his late 40s at that time, so still pretty young for holding such a position. And he had indeed been the Danish minister or ambassador, I don't know what his official title was, I think ambassador to Petrograd, St. Petersburg. And he didn't leave Russia until November 1918. He was very strongly anti-Bolshevik, but he managed to stay on there for a little over a year, and then came back and was made Danish Minister of Foreign Affairs in May 1920, and held on to that post until October 1922. I didn't do any deep digging about him because, he really, Dmitri mentions him once in 1918 and then on this trip to Denmark, but other than that, he's not really a figure in the diaries. Okay, so Dmitri is very pleased, and it seems to me that he's even, reading between the lines, it seems to me that he's in quite a good mood, and he hasn't always found the people in Paris and the people in London to be so friendly to Russians, to be ready to welcome them with open arms. He had some very bad experiences in 1918 and 1919 in relation to the authorities and government officials in both Paris and London, in both England and France, although he was certainly welcomed by high society in London and in France, but he's getting a different vibe, let's say, in Denmark, and one that's much friendlier. So, yeah, Baron Maindorf, what do we say about him? I don't have a lot of information on him. His name was Mikhail Felixovich, and his family was a prominent one in Imperial Russia, despite their German roots and their surname. And they were in the diplomatic corps, other members of the family, and apparently he was the something or other, the envoy or the chargé d'affaires in Denmark before the revolution. Unfortunately, I don't know for how long. Keep having to shift position here, but what Dmitri was hearing about him was not good, so that he was sort of hostile to the monarchy and to the dynasty, that he welcomed the revolution, that he made it a point right away to take down all of the double-headed eagles and the crowns in the Russian legation or ministry or embassy or whatever it was. Well, you could welcome the revolution without being pro-communist or pro-Bolshevik, and in fact, even some members of the imperial family very much welcomed Nicholas's abdication. And so that in itself wasn't necessarily a black mark about him. The rush to take down all the imperial regalia, or that's not the right word, all the symbols of the imperial regime, that would seem a little bit a little bit extreme, but he wanted to hold on to his position. So what happened to the various Russian embassies and legations and ministries all over the world after the revolution? So the diplomatic staff were left in a very delicate position. There were no Soviet diplomatic representatives, because most of these countries did not at first recognize the Soviet Union as a legitimate state. They certainly didn't recognize the Bolshevik regime initially as a legitimate state. And so, there were some attempts to meet, to maybe have some trade agreements, but it took a while for the various countries to acknowledge. Am I finally going to be set up here? Sorry about all this. It took a while. So, they were really scrambling to try and keep their positions in the countries where they were at, and Dmitri was not welcomed to stay at the Russian legation in Tehran, for instance, which is why he ended up at the British legation. So he had a lot of contact with the Russian minister there, a man by the name of Etter, who was Finnish Swedish, but had been an important in the Imperial Russian Diplomatic Corps. And not a Bolshevik type at all, but the position of these men was so precarious that they just couldn't afford to be strongly this or strongly that. So anyway, he was, Dmitri was not necessarily looking at that as a black mark against him. He understood after his experience in Tehran what a difficult position these people were in, and he understood the same in London. He, had spent time with the Russian ambassador to London, Soldatenkov, if I remember correctly, and gotten a lot of help from him and support, not financial, but in other ways. So, he sympathized with the position that these people were in. And some of them, indeed, would manage to, even after there was no more money coming from Russia and there was no official position, some of them managed to maintain something like a Russian emigre diplomatic system right up until, the beginning of the Second World War. So Baron Maindorf, Dmitri clearly did not know him before his arrival in Denmark, and he is not going to start out with any strong biases against him, and not going to listen to, he listens to, but not allow himself to be unduly influenced by what he's hearing from other people. So good for him. And at least judging by the way that he's treating Dmitri himself, he is a decent and attentive and courteous person. He's not, sort of snubbing Dmitri as a member of the imperial family, even though there's this talk about him sort of snubbing the empress and being rude or unpleasant to her. But Dmitri, as we know, is a very observant fellow, and he's not seeing this behavior on the part of Maindorf. So as I said, he's writing this 2 weeks after his initial arrival in Denmark. So, he's had time to observe that. Okay, and for the time being at least, Baron Maindorf is treated by his colleagues in the amongst the the Danish Foreign Office and the ambassadors or ministers of other country, including obviously Sir Charles Marling. He's being treated as a man who still occupies a real position. So all of that is good, and definitely come back as we continue on with this, getting to know people in Denmark, getting to make a deeper assessment of Denmark and how it might figure in his own life in the future. All right, so I'll see you next time. Bye.